What if I told you that the contact between Lewis Hamilton and Franco Colapinto in Miami 2026 not only ruined a race, but also uncovered a hidden problem that Frédéric Vasseur could not hide? Because what Ferrari showed the world was a simple first lap incident, but what really happened inside SF26 was a massive loss of performance that completely changed Hamilton's destiny, right on the weekend where the team had bet absolutely everything. And here's the big question that no one is answering. To what extent was that mild blow actually the beginning of a much more serious problem that Ferrari still does not want to acknowledge? Stay, because what Vasseur revealed totally changes the way you should understand what happened at Miami 2026. From the moment the lights went out at Miami 2026, Lewis Hamilton's career was already doomed, although no one knew it yet. Because what seemed like an aggressive start, typical of a first lap on a street circuit, hid the exact moment in which Ferrari's entire weekend collapsed without the possibility of recovery. Hamilton arrived at this Grand Prix in a completely different situation from the previous races, with a Ferrari that, according to the team's own circle, had received the most important package of improvements of the season, a technical leap that should put them back in the real fight for pole positions, and that also represented months of development focused specifically on this point in the calendar. But in a matter of seconds, all that work was compromised when he found himself in full battle with Franco Colapinto in a maneuver where both tried to maintain their position in an increasingly reduced space. The contact occurs in a critical area of the circuit, at a time when the cars are still loaded with maximum aerodynamic sensitivity and no margin for error. And although from the outside the impact did not generate immediate alarm, inside the car the story was completely different. Because this was not a visible hit, it was not a broken aileron or a piece coming off live. It was something much quieter and more dangerous: structural damage in one of the most delicate areas of the SF26. From that moment on, Hamilton no longer has the same car, although externally everything seemed normal. The Ferrari was still on the track, still rolling, but it was no longer competitive in the same way because the aerodynamic flow had been altered in a key area, causing a progressive loss of performance that could not be solved either with strategy or driving. And this is where the real drama begins, because the British driver does not abandon, he does not stop. He continues in the race with a car that, without many noticing, was constantly losing time lap after lap. The most shocking thing about all this is that not even the team itself had an immediate complete reading of the extent of the damage, forcing Hamilton to adapt on the fly, trying to maintain a competitive pace in a car that was no longer responding as it should, a situation that in modern Formula One is practically unsustainable when every tenth makes the difference between fighting for the podium or falling out of the real fight. And while all this was happening on the track, without any apparent drama, Frédéric Vasseur's subsequent speech began to be built, who after the race would suggest that that moment was the total breaking point of the weekend, not only for Hamilton's result, but for the complete reading of the Ferrari's performance in Miami. Because what this act reveals is not just an incident, it is the beginning of a domino effect that ended up affecting absolutely everything. But if the first impact was the trigger, what comes after is what really explains why Frédéric Vasseur speaks of a much more serious problem than it seemed, because as the laps progressed, Lewis Hamilton's car began to show completely anomalous behavior, something that did not fit with the previous data that Ferrari had of the SF26 throughout the weekend. It wasn't just a slight loss of performance, it was a constant and cumulative degradation that was getting worse lap after lap, and this is where you begin to understand the true extent of the damage. The key point is what Hamilton himself ends up revealing later. The loss of aerodynamic load was close to half a second per lap. And this is not a minor detail. In current Formula One, that figure is directly catastrophic because it not only leaves you out of the fight for the podium, it completely expels you from the real competitive rhythm. It turns you into a car vulnerable in defense and totally limited in attack. And the most critical thing is that this type of damage cannot be compensated. No matter the strategy, no matter the talent of the driver, no matter the tire management, when you lose that amount of charge, the car is no longer the same. Every corner becomes more unstable, every braking more compromised, and every attempt to push to the limit becomes a risk. This is where Vasseur's speech gains even more weight, because what he suggests is not only that the car was damaged, but that this damage affected precisely the most sensitive area of the new 2026 aerodynamic concept, where the air flow towards the flat bottom is absolutely critical. That is to say, it wasn't a superficial damage, it was a blow to the heart of the car's performance. And this generates an even more worrying consequence for Ferrari. All race data is contaminated. because you can no longer analyze the real behavior of the improvement package, you cannot validate whether the car was at the expected level, and you cannot compare fairly with your direct rivals. It's as if all the development work they brought to Miami disappeared at the moment of contact. Meanwhile, Hamilton was still on the track, fighting with a car that was no longer responding, trying to limit damage in a race that was already lost from the first lap, but unable to abandon because every point counts in such a tight championship. And this is where this act completely changes the perception of what happened. We are no longer talking about a simple racing incident. We are talking about a critical failure that exposes how fragile the performance of these cars can be in the face of the slightest contact. Because the big question that this point leaves is inevitable. If a seemingly light touch can generate such a brutal loss of performance, how far is the Ferrari's design really on the limit? And this is where everything takes on a much deeper meaning, because what Frédéric Vasseur reveals after Miami 2026 not only explains a lost race, but also reveals a much greater concern within Ferrari. Because the real problem was not only the damage suffered by Lewis Hamilton's car, the problem is what that damage shows about the concept of the SF26 itself. And this is what completely changes the narrative. Ferrari had bet everything on this package of improvements. They had invested resources, time, and development with the expectation that Miami would be the turning point of their season, the moment where they could finally measure their direct rivals face to face. But the incident with Franco Colapinto not only destroys that opportunity, but also leaves a much more dangerous internal doubt. How dependent is this car on perfect aerodynamics? Because when Vasseur avoids dramatizing but insists that the result does not reflect the real potential, he is actually protecting something bigger. He is avoiding opening the debate about the fragility of the car's performance. A car that, at the slightest contact, loses half a second per lap is not only damaged, it is exposed. And this is the most critical point of the entire analysis. Ferrari can't really know where it is. They cannot confirm if their evolution is working, they cannot measure their progress against McLaren or Mercedes, and most seriously, they cannot guarantee that in the next wheel-to-wheel battle exactly the same thing will not happen again. Because in modern Formula One, where cars are designed to the absolute limit of the regulations, any small alteration can break the entire balance. And what happened in Miami shows that the SF26 could be operating in too narrow a margin, where maximum performance only exists in perfect conditions. This makes Vasseur's words much more strategic than defensive. It's not just about justifying Hamilton. It's about buying time. It's about avoiding external pressure. It's about protecting the team, while internally they try to understand if the problem was circumstantial or structural. And this is where the whole circle comes full circle. What started as a simple touch on lap 1 ends up leaving a huge unknown about Ferrari's true level in 2026. Because the big question that Miami leaves is not who is to blame for the crash. The real question is whether Ferrari has a car capable of withstanding the Real fight on the track, or if any contact can once again bring down all its performance. And in the end, what Miami 2026 leaves behind is not simply a frustrating race for Lewis Hamilton. It is a much deeper warning sign for Ferrari. Because when you look at everything together, from the initial contact with Franco Colapinto to the measured but revealing statements of Frédéric Vasseur, what is really exposed is an uncomfortable reality. The SF26 is an extremely sensitive car, dependent on an aerodynamic perfection that, in real racing conditions, is almost impossible to maintain. Ferrari didn't just lose points, it lost a critical opportunity to validate its evolution. It lost references to its rivals, and most worryingly, it left open a doubt that could mark the rest of the season. They don't know with certainty where they really are. Because yes, the damage was serious. Yes, it completely conditioned the race, but that does not eliminate the underlying question. On the contrary, it makes it even bigger. If a seemingly minor touch can cause a performance drop of this level, then the problem isn't just the incident, it's the fragility of the concept. And that is where Vasseur's words take on another meaning. They're not just an explanation, they're a way to protect the team while they try to understand something much more complex. Because in Formula One, championships are not lost because of a single mistake. They are lost when you don't really understand your car. And after Miami 2026, Ferrari remains exactly at that point.